G'day UMob, how's it going? Welcome to this episode of Pete's 2 Cents. So today we're going to be answering your questions from Instagram. As always guys, I try and remind you that if you want to leave me a question, typically on Mondays, I leave a story on Instagram. Just do a search for Aussie English _ and you'll find me on Instagram, I'm sure. And I do a Q&A, little question and answer story. So you can, I leave a little question box and you can obviously ask your questions there. And then I do my very best to try and answer as many as possible on those stories, but also on these Pete's 2 Cents episodes. And sorry for the distraction sounding voice that I have at the moment. I am trying to send across the screenshots of all the questions to my computer so that I can more easily load them up and see them, and then answer them for you guys whilst recording this using some microphones on my phone, just because it makes life a little easier. So, okay. I think I have just sent them over to my book. Anyway, before we get into that, whilst that's sort of all organising itself, I hope you guys have been having a good week. What have I been up to? I've developed golfer's elbow, which is tendonitis, right? But it's not from golf. I've never played golf, not properly at least. It is from guitar. So I have been doing these workshops from an artist called Corey Wong. He is a funk guitarist, and I've got his course, and he has some really good workshops in there that sort of help you go through certain techniques, give you exercises to go through, and I've been doing them every single day, sort of religiously, right, for probably the last month. I think I've literally clocked up like 30 days. But clearly I haven't conditioned my arm properly, and I haven't been stretching properly either. And as a result, I woke up yesterday and it felt like I had like sort of a bruise on the inner elbow, right, on my left arm, right, the one that's doing all of the finger work on the fretboard of the guitar. And I felt initially like, oh, okay, I must have just dinged my arm or something and gotten a little bruise. Maybe I just smashed it into a door, I don't know, when I was doing some chores around the house or something like that. Anyway, it sort of progressively got worse throughout the day, and then I was feeling the muscles in my arm, and I could feel that they were really tense and tight, and obviously putting a lot of strain on those tendons. And surmised, worked out that it was the guitar that had been doing it. So over the last few days, I've been trying to sort of stretch it out, using a massage gun. I've got a massage gun here at home that sort of vibrates, and I can just loosen out the muscles, and then, just taking it easy, doing a few exercises to try and strengthen it. But I'm obviously going to have to try and work out how to go forward. I've given the guitar a bit of a rest for a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those things, man. The older you get, the more your body just starts falling apart and you start having these issues. Anyway, hopefully it's going to disappear soon. But that's what I've been up to. And apart from that, getting ready to go away this weekend, which is going to be a bit of fun. We're going away to my grandparents' farm up near Bendigo. So that's going to be fun. And we're taking the kids so that they get to experience that. And that's been in the family for, well, I guess now generations, right? So my grandparents bought that farm in, I assume, the 60s or the 70s. I'm not sure of the exact year. And they had sheep on the farm. And if you're in my academy, actually, if you have the academy membership, you'll see, I think it's module number 2, is where I interview my grandfather about, having the farm and raising sheep and what it was like, why he decided to do it, all that sort of stuff. So that was a really good, fun interview. But yeah, we went up there as kids, and it was just such a cool experience going up to this farm and seeing sheep and, helping round them up and then giving them different medication or clipping their toenails. You have to do that on a regular basis. And then shearing them, obviously, before summer. And it was just such a really cool family kind of event where there would be, 10 to 15 of us up there doing this regular kind of like family chores sort of stuff up on the farm. It was such a cool experience. But unfortunately there's sheep up there still, but we don't shear them or anything. They're someone else's, and my grandparents have gone to 90s now and they just can't physically manage it, and so they just rent the property out to another farmer who has a certain number of sheep on that property grazing. So anyway, bit of an intro there, guys. Let's get into some of these questions. Okay, this one comes from Tyler D. Moss. Do you think it's a bad pursuit for an American to move to Australia? So do I think it's a bad idea for an American to move to Australia? It's going to depend on why, and what your goals are, what would you say? It's really going to depend, what do you want to do? What do you want to work as? What's your outlook on life? Americans tend to have a sort of, at least the Americans that I hear talk about Australia, which may not necessarily be a fair representative of all Americans, but often they have quite a negative view of Australian politics and laws and everything. They think we're very restrictive. You can't really easily access guns. We don't have legalized marijuana yet, although ironically the reason that marijuana in Australia is illegal is because of the US. So yeah, it is interesting. You often hear people like Joe Rogan crapping on Australia about how repressive our politics or our government and laws are, but I think you'd enjoy the place, If you come here and you're sort of left-leaning, you're, interested in nature, and yeah, I think cost of living would probably be on par. It might be a little more expensive here depending on where you're living, but most of the Americans you meet in Australia love the place, especially obviously the ones that are living here, that have decided to live here. Then yeah, they definitely love Australia. And so I don't think it's a bad pursuit. It just really depends on what your motivations are. Why are you doing it? The negatives are, if you're someone who is massively into guns, then you're going to probably have to leave a lot of that stuff behind. We're not as kind of openly Christian or religious as the US. What other negatives? We don't have the same kind of food, broadly speaking, but if you're into specific things from the US, you'll come here and you'll be like, no, I can't get those. I have to do with Vegemite. What else? What are the negatives that an American would experience in Australia? Maybe the cost of living, depending on, again, where you are. But wages may also be higher for sort of normal jobs, right? Because we have the minimum wage in Australia, whereas a lot of the US doesn't. We don't really have tipping culture. So I don't know. I think try it, see what you think. You can always move back, I imagine. But yeah, I don't think there's any issue at all. There's loads of Americans that live here in Australia. This one comes from Fatima Mayar. Nothing to ask, just want to say thank you for your podcast. That's really nice, mate. Thank you so much for the kind words. Winnie Lau asks, which part of Australia are you in? So I am currently living on the Bellarine Peninsula, which is the left-hand side of Port Phillip Bay, up against the coast here, right? So where the bay opens. Port Phillip Bay is the bay near Melbourne, which is the capital of the state of Victoria, and we're down in the southeast of Australia. And going into winter at the moment. It's starting to get cooler, which is good and bad. It's kind of like, it's good to have a change. I think I would hate to live in a place where it's just always the one kind of climate or temperature all year round. I think the tropics would wear me out pretty quickly. It's one of those things where it's nice to have really, really hot days and warm days, humid days every now and then. But if it was that every single day, you'd go crazy, I think. Same thing for cold days. It's good to have them every now and then, but if that was all you had every single day, it would probably drive me a bit loopy after a while. So where we live down here in Southeast Australia is pretty good because we kind of fluctuate between all of these different extremes, and we have very distinct seasons. So we have, summer, spring, autumn, winter, and they're all pretty distinct from one another. And so every 3 or 4 months, you're sort of moving from one to the other. And yeah, you just never really get bored. I don't know. I kind of like it. We also have that stereotype of 4 seasons in one day where I think, in Melbourne or in this area, typically, it's kind of the descent and ascent into and out of winter. So as summer transitions into autumn and then into winter, that transition period, you kind of end up with days where it'll be really hot and then really cold or rainy, and then it'll be windy later on and it won't be raining anymore. And so you have to kind of try and pack clothes for every single possible condition during those periods. And then it's the same coming out of winter and going through spring into summer. You'll end up with that same kind of thing where I remember living in Melbourne, I would, have to pack pants if I was wearing shorts, and if I went out in a t-shirt, I would make sure I had a jumper just in case, because during those periods, it's like the weather will just turn on a dime. It'll just suddenly change, and it's like, oh crap, I've left all my my winter clothing at home or my summer clothing at home, and you're like, I'm stuck at work, and it's pissing down with rain, and I'm in thongs, shorts, and a t-shirt, and I walked here, so yeah, I'm screwed if I go home and it's like this. All right, let's keep going. This one comes from That One Moody Beach. Good one. Is Australia migrant friendly? Yes, I would say largely yes. Obviously, it's going to be the same thing everywhere. You're always going to have certain individuals or parts of the society or demographics that don't like immigrants, but Australia is an immigrant country, right? Besides our obvious indigenous population that live here, we were colonized 230 years ago, and we're just full of so many different nationalities. I'm in a marriage with someone who was born overseas. I think it's something like 50% of people are born overseas or have parents who are born overseas that live in Australia. So yeah, Australia is made up of migrants, effectively. The majority of us are migrants. You just have to go back a certain number of generations, and you'll hear someone's story of how their family came to Australia. So it's definitely very migrant friendly. It's going to depend on location too. I'm sure that there are certain locations where people will be more friendly than not, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, just don't believe the scare stories that you hear online or see in the news or whatever about like really random, rare instances of racism, all that sort of stuff, because by and large, I think migrants absolutely love it here. And that's why they come, that's why we got 500,000 migrants in the last year come to Australia. It's full of migrants because migrants love to live here, and it offers a, great quality of life. Knock on wood at the moment, although cost of living, the price of housing, all that sort of stuff is just going through the roof. So, stay tuned. We'll see what happens in the near future. Okay. Sabira Husseini asks, what would you like to tell me about how to speak English fluently? Well, this is one of those questions that I get a lot, and there's no real secret to it. It is one of those things that, unfortunately, like learning guitar, like trying to get good at anything, there's no real quick fix, do this one trick and you'll be sweet. That's learn to be fluent in 30 days type thing. Really, it's a mindset, and it's a work ethic. If you can keep showing up every single day and working on your English skills, on your English fluency, assessing where your weak points are, and then coming up with a plan for how to deal with those. If you can just keep doing that day in, day out, even if it's just a little bit every single day, right? 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. You don't have to do 8 hours a day to keep working and keep improving. But that's really the key. So I would say, instead of just one kind of tip or trick, really it's get into a routine of practicing your English and focusing on the things that you're having trouble with, right? So, and I noticed this with my guitar. This is why I was doing those Corey Wong workshops, because I knew that I had technical issues that I wanted to overcome, right? I wanted to be able to play faster, more accurately, more smoothly. I wanted to have better vibrato, all of that sort of stuff. I wanted my technique to be better. So I found a course that had someone teaching it who was very good at technique, and he had these workshops, and so I was doing that on a regular basis every single day, even if it was just half an hour to an hour in length. And I was actually tracking my results in an Excel spreadsheet too. So I was using a metronome to see how fast I could do certain exercises, and just gradually increasing the speed of the metronome, and I could see in the Excel spreadsheet my progress. So that's another big thing too. Find a way to be able to measure and track your progress. But really, if I try and move away from obviously those broad stroke kind of pieces of advice of work on it every single day, try and assess where your weak points are or what you need to improve upon, and then come up with a plan for how to do that, right? If you can do those things, you're going to improve over time. And obviously the more you can do, the better. But don't make it impossible to do. But then specifically for fluency, a big thing that I did when I was sort of initially learning Portuguese and or French, so both these languages that I at one point had both at pretty good fluency, but French not so much anymore because I just haven't used it very much at all in the last few years. But Portuguese I still speak on a regular basis at home with my wife and my kids. A big thing was working out my most common sentences. So when I was trying to speak in Portuguese with my wife, I would be thinking, where am I getting stuck? So when there are certain things that I'm wanting to say and that I know I can say in my native language, and I have certain chunks of words or certain phrases that I use all the time to express certain ideas, trying to write these down and then actively look for a way to say it in your target language is a massive thing when it comes to fluency, right? So fluency really is your ability to speak as unhindered as possible, to be able to convey your ideas without getting stuck, without having to search for words or expressions, all that sort of stuff. If you can do that clearly, you're obviously, fluent. So if you're having trouble with fluency, obviously a big problem is that you're getting stuck in certain areas when you're trying to talk, and you're having to consciously try and find the words. You're having to pause and think, what do I want to say? What's the word again? How do I say it? Blah, 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 and then mentally try and find that word or that phrase. So if you can start taking note of when you get stuck and where you get stuck, is it certain topics? Is it certain phrases? Is it certain tenses? When you try and talk about what you did yesterday, you're having a lot of trouble. When I try and use the past tense, I have no trouble when I'm speaking in the present or the future, but the past I always seem to have a lot more difficulty with. Paying attention to those things and then trying to come up with phrases or vocab in English, effectively thinking about what it is you're trying to say in your native language. So imagine, if with me in Portuguese, I would be thinking, okay, the English things that I would want to say are these things, and I would write them down. And then I would be going online and using a dictionary, a translating device, a sentence mining device, whatever it is, whatever these websites are, to find the equivalent phrase in Portuguese. So I'm trying to think. So by the skin of your teeth, right? That's an expression. If I was trying to think, how do I say that? I think in Portuguese, and it's been a while since I've used this expression, but I think it's like agarrar com unhas e dentes. So I think it's like grab it with claws and teeth. I think that's what the expression is. But again, I would go away and look this up, because I know that translating this expression word for word would just confuse the shit out of anyone that I said it to, right? By the skin of your teeth. If I tried to say that in Portuguese, I think most people would just look at you strangely, because it doesn't make sense trying to translate that expression. So that'd be one thing. If I found myself having a conversation and thinking, God, I really want to be able to say the expression by the skin of your teeth, meaning just like I only just managed to do it, just by the skin of my teeth, I would then go away, I would write that expression down, and I would do that study and try and find a way to translate that, and then go away and ask someone who speaks Portuguese, does this make sense in this context? So I know I'm rambling a bit, but that happens when I'm answering these questions off the top of my head. But basically that's what I would suggest. It would be that having some kind of a plan, being consistent, analyzing what you do and don't do well, focusing on the things that you don't do well that you wish you could improve, but then also thinking about your native language, trying to scrutinize and think about what are the phrases and vocab that I use all the time in my native language that I am finding difficult to use in English, and then go away and learn those things, because it's that it follows a trajectory of like the law of diminishing returns. There's going to be loads of phrases, loads of words, loads of grammar initially that you can learn, and it covers the majority of everything you're ever going to say. Right? And there's all this other stuff, all these other words, pieces of grammar rules, all that sort of stuff that you might use once every week, once every month, once every year, or you may not use at all. And there's no point wasting a lot of time trying to learn those. Instead, it would be focusing on what it is that you actually want to be able to use on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I hope that helps. But really the key is just keep going. Just keep going. Um, okay. Oh, this was a cool one. I answered this in an expression episode that I've written today, and I'll probably record and release in the next week or two, but I'll answer it here as well. This one comes from Sarah Pironi, who asks, what's your favorite Australian word that only Australian people can understand? And I wrote down three. So three expressions. Actually, two expressions of one word. So the word that I love is budgie smugglers. If you said that to anyone else, they would be incredibly confused. They would not know what you were talking about unless they were Australian or had been in Australia for long enough to have learnt that phrase or, interacted with Aussies and learnt it. A budgie is a small parrot, a budgerigar, they're called. I think that's the indigenous name for that small, colourful parrot. These are in the pet trade. You'll find them everywhere all over the world. They're the small, colourful parrots that you can buy. Budgies or budgerigars, we shorten it to just budgies. Smuggler. A smuggler is someone who takes like contraband goods and doesn't pay tax on importing or exporting them, right? Or taking them somewhere where it's illegal. So, you can smuggle drugs from one country to another. You may smuggle cigarettes or alcohol or gold, the money. There's loads of things you can smuggle. So budgie smugglers, the idea, it's kind of crass. So it's referring to Speedos, right? So the male swimwear that is the same shape as kind of like underwear, right? And it looks like when you look at a male wearing Speedos, so if you watch the Olympics and you see men swimming, their genitals, their penis, their testicles inside the underwear look like small budgies or eggs being smuggled in someone's underwear, if that makes sense. So that's where that's where the Australian humour comes out. And budgie smuggler is what we use for male swimwear or Speedos, right? The underwear-looking shaped swimwear that men sometimes wear. It's one of those weird things. I think old men might wear it at the beach, but typically I think the only kind of people who wear that kind of swimwear are going to be people who are swimming professionally, probably, just to reduce the amount of drag, I guess, whilst they're moving through the water. It's kind of a bit weird to see people at the pool. Like if I saw a grown man just in some Speedos at the pool, I'd think, he's a swimmer. Or if he wasn't and he was just, wandering around with his kids or something, I'd be like, that guy's brave. he's ballsy, It's one of those things. It's just a bit weird to wear. Then I had no wuckers for no worries. This isn't rude, but it comes from it's an abbreviation of the phrase no fucking worries, right? So no worries, you can make this rude obviously saying no fucking worries, and not necessarily rude in that it's going to offend someone, but very informal, right? You mind fucking finishing this work? Yeah, no fucking worries, mate. Like you can by just inserting the F-bomb, you're making it very informal, and it can appear rude to other people listening. But wuckers comes from switching the first letter of fucking and worries, and it becoming wucking. I think it became no wucking furries, so we switched it around to make it less rude. No wucking furries, and then it became no wuckers. No wuckers. No wuckers, mate. Yeah, no wuckers. So that's very Australian. And I think, again, it's not like it's massively complicated, but the average American or Brit would just hear that and be like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what a wuckers, what it is. And then lastly is Kenoth. Kenoth. And this is used to show that you really agree with someone. So if someone came up to me and said, oh man, guitar elbow, right, really hurts, doesn't it? I could be like, yeah, Kenoth, mate. Kenoth, it hurts. Kenoth. And again, it's one of these derived terms. It comes from fucking oath, which is a lot ruder because you're saying the word fucking. And we then, to make it a little more acceptable to say this in public, we've just removed the first part of the word fucking and we've just turned the king into a kun, and we say Kenoth, Kenoth. And so you'll see this in signs, advertising, material, all that sort of stuff. The same with no wuckers, where originally there was a rude word in there, but the spelling or the pronunciation or whatever has changed to the point where it's now kind of accepted to be able to say informally in public. So those are the three. Kenoth, no wuckers, and budgie smugglers. I think if you were to say any of these things to people who had never been to Australia or had learnt or experienced these phrases in the past, you would confuse the average English speaker. So I hope you find those interesting. If you've got Australian friends, try them out. Use them with them. Ask them how they would use these in their, daily English. And again, if you're worried about offending anyone, you just say, like, I heard this the other day. I'm not sure if it's rude or not. Can I ask you? And I think the average person isn't going to be offended if you then say a rude word, right? It's always context dependent. There's a big difference between saying, fuck and calling someone a fuck, right? So, yeah. You can be offensive towards someone, and then you can be informal and use offensive language and not necessarily upset anyone. But yeah, if in doubt, go without. But feel free to ask people. And that was how I learned to kind of manage swearing and offensive language and everything in Portuguese. A big part of it was always having these conversations with friends and my wife and just saying, I've read this word or I heard this word. Do you use this word? How do you use this word? Is it racist? Is it okay to use in this context? Is it sexist? What's the situation that I can use this in? And that's, you don't have to ever go on and use it, but you'll then know, right? You'll then know. And it's funny to sort of keep rabbiting on here, to keep carrying on. There are a lot of people that I've chatted to in the past who will think Australians are being offensive and horrible to them, and they're just misinterpreting the context. So an Australian may be swearing, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily being nasty to you or vilifying you or being horrible. It may just be that they're very informal and they use this language on a regular basis. And I've had people come to me being all worried about a certain situation that unfolded at work or that happened with, a friend or something, and the friend said something, say they were an Australian and they've said something, and the person who heard it or who it was said to, their English isn't native, it's not their native language, and so they misinterpret it and think just because the person's swearing that they were being nasty to them. And then I have to tell them, no, they were trying to be friendly actually and informal by using that language, and you shouldn't get upset. So I guess long story short, this is why it's important to know how and when and everything this language, rude language, is used in English, whether or not you decide to use it yourself, okay? All right, let's keep going. Okay, this one comes from Imva. What's the most difficult something when you want to learn English? I'm not sure the most difficult something that you've got, like difficulta, and then when you want to learn something or learn English. I'm not sure. If it's like aspect or thing, what's the most difficult aspect of learning English? It's really going to depend on your native language. That's a big part of it, right? There's, if you're a German speaker, you're going to find it a lot easier to learn English than someone from Japan or Egypt or Iceland. There are going to be certain languages that are further away, that are more distant, that are grammatically a great deal different. Pronunciation-wise, they're very different. Those people are going to have completely different problems than, say, someone from France or Italy when learning English. So it really depends. I would say one of the biggest things that gets overlooked is probably intonation and rhythm. And it's not necessarily the pronunciation when people are speaking, although that's a big one. But it's this sort of really subtle aspect to how English uses intonation over the top of a sentence, with the tone rising and falling, with the pitch rising and falling and changing, and how that changes the meaning of phrases, right? So a good example my dad always uses is the phrase "good on ya," right? This can mean well done, literally. Good on you, as in, you did a good job. Well done. Good on you. But depending on how you say this and the intonation that you use over the top of the phrase, it can completely change the meaning. So like if I were to just say, good on ya, that's obviously a statement. It's pretty low energy on my part, just saying, oh, good on ya. If I were to say, good on ya, that's like I'm really excited. And I'm pumped for you, and well done. And it's like you can tell from the tone and the intonation and pitch that it's I'm actually being very positive. If I was to say it a different way, like, oh, good on ya, you can tell that I'm kind of skeptical of something you've said, but I'm not angry or upset. I'm sort of in a good mood, but skeptical. Oh, good on ya. Like, yeah, good on ya. Like, I don't believe you, but I'm not angry. Whereas if I said, oh yeah, good on ya, the pitch again, I've changed it, and now you can tell I'm skeptical, but a little angry. Oh yeah, good on ya. Good on ya. And so nailing those things, those aspects to speaking English, and it's obviously not unique to English. All languages are going to have different aspects to how it's spoken that are really nuanced, that are actually really difficult to ever master. I would say in English, that is one of the most difficult things that even really advanced speakers, so like my wife is a perfect example. You know, she would speak probably C2 in English. She's using it every single day. She has a job in English. She's on the phone constantly. So she has very, very good English. But she still gets intonation wrong at times. And I will misinterpret what she's trying to say. Or I will take something like she's being more serious than she's meaning to. And her native language is Portuguese, which is very close to English. You know, it's an Indo-European language. It's Latin-based. It's very similar to a lot of the vocab in English because of French. But she still just hasn't, for whatever reason, I don't think she wouldn't have actually studied it, because a lot of the time people don't make lessons about these types of things and focus on it for very much time. And she's obviously just not absorbed it naturally, because it is just one of these very, very subtle things that most people never master, because also you don't really need to in order to get by, you know? So that would probably be one of the things. Grammar-wise, probably the more obscure tenses. The tenses that we don't use as often, right? So like if you were to use the future past tense, I will have arrived by that time. I will have seen him when you arrive tomorrow. Those sorts of tenses as well, they're pretty advanced. And I think the reason they're difficult isn't necessarily because they're very complicated. It's more because they're not used anywhere near as frequently as something like, you know, the present tense or the past simple tense, all that sort of stuff. Those are the ones that are used the bulk of the time. And then you've got these other very obscure kind of tenses that you would use a lot less frequently. Like if you were to, I reckon if you were to analyze the spoken English I use on a daily basis, it'd be really interesting to see how many times I use the future past tense. Like I will have done that by the time that you blah. I reckon it would be probably less than once a day that I would use that kind of tense, whereas I'm probably using the present tense and the past tense and everything on a minutely basis, you know, depending on how often I'm talking. So anyway, let's keep going. Walk and work in an Australian accent. Some people get work as walk in the US accent. Okay, this one comes from Josh Carlos Paulo. Yeah, so or and they're both long vowels. Or, as in walk, I'm walking to work. I'm walking outside. I'm walking in the street. I like to walk. That's or, right? Or. Is for work. So or, the tongue is slightly lower, the lips are rounded. It's like you could fit a very small apple inside your mouth, if that makes sense. So it's like your mouth is hollow enough, but your lips are kind of rounded and closed. Or, walk, talk. And then work, the tongue is slightly wider and the lips aren't as round. Work. They're kind of more open too, slightly. Work. Walk to work. I want to walk to work. Now, I think the issue with the US accent would be they'd say walk for walk, as in to walk with your legs. Walk. And so their mouth is kind of a little further open. It's a different vowel sound. Walk. And I'm probably butchering it, so forgive me for that. However, work for them, their dialect of English is rhotic, so they always say the R sound, and it affects vowels when it comes after the vowel. So it becomes a rhotic kind of vowel where you would say right, instead of That would be the Australian version. There's no rhoticity. I'm not using the R sound. I'm not changing the shape of my tongue. but then with the American version, you have to kind of curl your tongue into an R position after the vowel. So they would say work and walk, I think, in American, where we would say walk and work. So you don't have to worry about the R. That's a good thing. It's funny. People will be like, oh man, Australian pronunciation is so difficult, but it's actually easier in terms of the vowels and the rhoticity using the R sounds, because you only use the R sound if there's a vowel after the R. Whether it's within a word or the following word, you only say the R sound if it comes afterwards. So the vowels are always the same. They don't change based on whether or not there's an R there. So yes, hopefully that makes sense. I need to have a drink. It's funny, I open this kombucha right at the start and then just forget to actually have any. And my voice starts going. Okay. Let's keep going. Do you reckon South African English sounds like Australian English? No. There are aspects to it that do, but pretty quickly you notice, very quickly it's not, and that it stands out like a sore thumb. I think it's the R's. They'll say like, so if I were to say the word Africa, I'm using a very rhotic R, right? A r, Africa. I think that African English, or South African, accent, they would use more of like a T-flap type sound, so it'd be like Africa, and it almost trills. It almost does this like kind of sound. Africa. I'm from South Africa. They would speak like that. So there's the R sound that I would listen out for and pretty much straight away hear and be like, yeah, they're not Australian. Africa. I'm from South Africa. It would sound like that. And then there's certain vowel sounds that they use that, again, it's kind of similar to New Zealand English, where it does sound similar, but as soon as they use one of those vowel sounds that's unique to them, boom, it just stands out like a sore thumb, and we know instantly, okay, they're New Zealander or they're South African, or, so I'm trying to think of, yeah, they would use these kind of like slightly different, I think the diphthongs, those ones that would be like, so I would say like here, and in South African English, they might say here, they might have this kind of like y sound in there, here. I'm over here. They may use that type of thing. And again, it's very obvious to us as Australians. All right. Let's get going. This one comes from EVGK. Pass the language on to someone or on to someone, as in on to is two different words, or on to as in a single word. Now, I'm pretty sure I covered this in my phrasal verb course. If you go over to aussieenglish.com.au and go to courses, you'll find my phrasal verb course where I talk about this topic. And unfortunately, I can't remember off the top of my head what the rule is. I think by and large, this is the kind of thing that native speakers probably screw up all the time. Let's see. Phrasal verb onto versus onto. So, while on space to is used when the word on belongs to the verb before it, the word onto, as in a single word, has a straightforward definition. Onto is a preposition. It shows location. That means on top of, or sometimes on. Yeah, so I think from memory, if the phrasal verb is to pass something on, so I want to pass this on, and then you want to say, you want to put an object in there. Who are you passing it on to? Then on and to are separate words. So if the phrasal verb has the preposition in the phrasal verb to pass something on, then you would use two words when using to, on to. However, if I say, I'm trying to think of a good example of using on to as a single word. I get onto the bus, right? So I guess you could say I'm getting on the bus. I'm getting on to the bus. That's such a difficult one. I think here it would be like, because you can say onto or on, you could use either one of these. It's probably a single word. Yeah, this is a difficult one. I would probably dive into the grammar books and really try and come up with some key examples. I won't be able to do this off the top of my head without confusing you and probably confusing myself and then getting it wrong. But suffice it to say that it's not the kind of thing that native speakers will get confused by, typically, unless it's something very, very, very obscure. Like the meaning is really, really, really subtly different from the other version. And it's probably the type of thing that Australians screw up as well. You know, English speakers in general screw up this kind of thing and make these mistakes. So let's continue. What are we up to? We've done 40 minutes. Jeez, we're going today. Okay. This one comes from Insoyon. Where do you think in Australia the best city to live is? Oh, man. Again, these questions, it's so subjective. But if you were doing it just cost of living, probably somewhere like Adelaide or Perth at the moment. I've heard Adelaide is very difficult to get a house at the moment. They have the lowest availability on the rental market. So again, you know, it may be relatively affordable to live there, but it may be very difficult to move there today and try and find somewhere to live. I think if you can afford to live anywhere, then somewhere like Melbourne, Brisbane, I sort of hesitate to say Sydney, not because, you know, I'm from near Melbourne and hate Sydney, but Sydney's just so expensive, and it's just, because I've got a load of friends living there and they're just saying the quality of life as well is just going down the toilet, where it's incredibly busy, there's traffic jams constantly, nothing is well planned out in terms of the layout of the city and the highways and everything. I think one of my friends sent me a picture the other day of them paying the toll to go in and out of Sydney on one day, and it was $115 to just drive from the outer suburbs into the CBD and then back out again. And so, yeah, it's not somewhere that I would really recommend trying to live. It's getting out of control in Sydney. But if you can study anywhere, you know, I would say smaller the better, right? Like if you're studying or working or just traveling and that sort of thing, go somewhere small. So smaller towns, you know, that still have enough stuff there that you're not going to sort of lose quality of living. You know, you can go to the movies, you can go to the mall, you can go to the shops, all that sort of stuff. You know, you don't have to go to a town where there's only 5 people and 4 dogs. But I would say, you know, like in Victoria here, if you live in towns like Geelong or Bendigo or Ballarat or, you know, Gippsland, if your lifestyle and what you're up to here in Australia allows you to live in those sorts of locations, Warrnambool's another one. You know, I would probably try living in those areas as opposed to the cities, the big cities, specifically, because it's going to be more affordable. It's going to be quieter. It's less busy. It's just going to probably be a more laid back, calmer kind of Aussie lifestyle. Whereas if you live in the middle of a CBD, it's just not, I mean, unless you're a massive socialite, who loves noise and partying and all that, then you're probably going to not enjoy it as much. Okay. This one comes from Chan Chung Yan. How do you pronounce review, as in to review someone's essay? To review it, to review, and reveal. So reveal would be like to show something. Reveal, so the vowel sound is ear, reveal, and there's an L at the end. Reveal and review. Review. It's a U vowel sound, the long U sound, and there's a yod in front of it. So with the word view, you've got this y in front of the U vowel sound. It's not vu, it's view. View, review. Review, reveal. And you'll hear in reveal, there's no yod, there's no y. It's not veal, it's veal. Review, reveal. All right, I might do one more and then finish up, guys. Jab Z asks, "G'day, mate. Pete, why is it so hard in Melbourne to find a partner, in brackets, a lady, to do the life with?" Man, it's hard in general. I don't think it matters where you are. It's just hard. I think, you know, I remember when I was single and dating back when I lived in Melbourne, I never found it difficult to get a date. Like and this is, I'm not trying to brag, but using apps like Tinder at the time or, going out and just meeting people, there was lots of single people all over the place, but I found it really difficult to connect with any of them. So like, I mean, you know, everyone was relatively nice, but to get to the deeper level of wanting to have a relationship with someone, I found difficult. And often you would find someone that you really liked and they didn't connect with you, you know? So I think it's hard in general. I haven't lived in Melbourne for, God, 7 years. So I don't know if it's suddenly changed, but I would say cities too are just a little more difficult. I think potentially too that there's just too much choice for people these days. I wonder if this is sort of affecting relationships, because it's kind of like it's that whole social media thing and apps like Tinder where there's always someone else that could potentially be around the corner that you could always be upgrading. You could be thinking in your head, oh man, I might always find someone better. Whereas if you live, I think, you know, in those times like my parents, when they met at uni, there were no mobile phones, there was no social media, there was no internet. And I imagine that they didn't have to grapple with those types of FOMO or thinking they could always upgrade on someone, you know, that the average person does today. It's only going to get worse, I imagine. But I think my advice typically is just keep making yourself available to people, right? Like, so go to events, meet people, make new friends. And as a result, you're going to interact with loads and loads and loads of ladies in this case. And hopefully, just based on numbers, that means you'll end up finding one that you really click with and that you'll get along with in the future. And it's just, yeah, it's one of those things you just never know. You never know until it happens. And it's funny, like, I probably dated, whilst I was living in Melbourne, for about, I don't know, I was there for about 10 years, but I probably dated about 100 people, right? So, I mean, as in like went on at least one date with. So 10 a year, less than one a month. But I never really had any long-term relationships until I met my now wife, obviously at the end of that period. You know, I wasn't dating after I met her. And it just, yeah, for one reason or another, it just never seemed to work out with the women that I was dating. And I was the kind of person where I didn't need to be in a relationship to feel self-worth. So I didn't want to waste people's time. I didn't want to hurt people either. So I was always pretty conscious of the fact that after 3 or 4 months of dating someone, if I wasn't feeling like it was going anywhere or that I was falling in love with this person, I would typically end the relationship, because I didn't want them to be falling in love with me and it not being reciprocated and me just being insecure and wanting to have someone, you know, that I'm in a relationship with for the sake of it. So I was sort of happy being single instead of just being stuck in a relationship with someone for the sake of being in one. But yeah, then I met my wife, and when you know, you know. It was just easy. It was one of those things, it was just easy. I clicked. Just talking. I still remember the first time we were talking online, because she was living in Townsville. She sent me a bunch of memes whilst we were having a conversation, and I was like, she just gets my sense of humor. She gets it. She was sending me these memes that were related to the things we were talking about, you know, little GIFs, the little things that come up in Facebook chat or whatever. And I was like, oh fuck, she gets it. She's got a sense of humor. And it was just easy. So I think that's the thing too. If you're in relationships or you're dating people and it just feels like a lot of work, and you're thinking, God, is this how it's meant to be? Is this really what it's like? No, I don't think it is. You know, it should be easy, at least in those initial stages, right? It should be incredibly fun, effortless, and the other person should make you feel happy and amazing. You know, it shouldn't be hard work. You shouldn't be with someone that's making you feel like shit, or where it's just, yeah. I don't know. I'm rambling, but I would say just keep trying. And I guess the story I wanted to give you. So I had my best friend from high school. He was single for probably 10 years. He had a massive dry spell. We say a dry spell, right? So I guess the idea of it either not raining or you not drinking alcohol. It would be one of those analogies. He didn't date anyone. He didn't sleep with anyone. He wasn't with anyone for like 10 years. And I think he just lost all confidence. He was busy with his job, his career, and he just didn't bother dating anyone, didn't bother getting to know anyone, and it sort of just let all these, you know, chances that potentially came his way just go by. Anyway, so I ended up twisting his arm and sort of suggesting he get on Tinder, because worst thing he can just not reply to people, right? You don't lose anything. And because he had a massive, sort of confidence issue. And I just said, get on there and you'll meet people that you wouldn't have otherwise met. And they're not going to be friends of friends. They're not going to know your, family or friends. And they're the only people you're really meeting at the moment, people that you already have connections with. And it was funny because I think he went on like 2 or 3 dates and met the person that he's now got 2 kids with. So it was really funny. I think it was like 3 or 4 months that he went from being single and not having dated anyone, slept with anyone, being with anyone, having any kind of romantic relationship at all for 10 years. And he knocked her up. He got her pregnant. And fortunately, they were obviously, it was working really well, and they're still together now after probably 5-6 years now. So yeah, we always laugh that he just never saw it coming. It just crept up on him and got him. So I think hopefully it's a similar sort of situation for you, mate. But I would say it's a numbers game in terms of you needing to get out there and meet different people. And as a result of doing that frequently, you'll end up meeting someone who just takes your breath away, steals your heart, and who hopefully you do that to as well. And you guys will be, you'll be soulmates. So anyway, bit of a long one today. I hope you've enjoyed this, guys. I know I ramble quite a bit, but hopefully it's a good exercise for you to work on your listening, and we get to answer a bunch of these questions that you guys find really interesting. These things that are on your mind, and you get to hear my 2 cents, my opinion, and take it for what it's worth, and hopefully it helps. But yeah, I guess lastly, don't forget, if you want to support the podcast whilst also leveling up your English, check out the premium podcast membership at aussieenglish.com.au/podcast. And you need to also remember that the Pete's 2 cents episodes are the ones that don't come with transcripts. Every other episode on the podcast does. So it's over 1,200 episodes now have transcripts so that you can listen and read at the same time. So yeah, go check that out. aussieenglish.com.au/podcast. I'm Pete, your host. It's been a pleasure, and I'll chat to you next time. See ya.